Let's move on to the next style of interviews, the traditional interviews. I had to do a traditional med school interview for Drew University and New Jersey Medical School's accelerated 7-year BSMD program. I also had to do kind of traditional interviews with undergrad schools as well. I'm gonna be real, those are all like pretty easy and straightforward. In particular here, we're going to be discussing the med school traditional interviews. I don't mean to scare you here, but if I'm being completely honest with you, traditional interviews with med schools, at least in my experience, are more difficult than MMI interviews. Once you get the hang of MMI type questions, there is nothing new to be asked. All of the questions are just common sense based questions. But when you take a traditional interview, be ready to be grilled a little bit. They're going to ask you a lot of questions in depth, and there is absolutely no BSing on your part that's going to get you out of it. Now, Pratik, what do you mean by that? Why should I be like a little bit more mindful when I approach these traditional interviews and make sure that I actually practice for them? Well, when you go into a traditional interview, just know that your interviewer is prepared. Okay, number one, they're a good interviewer. So they're going to ask you a good number of questions. And secondly, they've seen your resume. This is not some like random interview where they don't know you. They've actually read through your full application beforehand. They've prepared some questions specifically based on the extracurriculars and things that you've referenced, and then they're going to ask you about it. So here's what you need to know. When they ask you about your research, you need to be very well versed in what you did. This is the first pitfall that a lot of kids have. If you went ahead and you did research in a lab, let's say the lab research that you did was like 2 years ago, right? You're interviewing in your 12th grade, you did some research in 10th grade in a lab, and that's like a big thing on your resume. Oh, I did this big lab research project. It might be a little bit distant in your memory. Make sure that that is not the case, because your interviewer is going to ask you specifically about what you did. They might ask you about the implications of your research. They might even know something about that field and ask you specific things about it. It's not the most rare thing in the world for an interviewer to start digging about like what research you've done, and then that just dissolving into like a 20-30 minute conversation about your research. And so if you don't know what you did, or you were kind of capping on your resume, just know that they could call you out for that. So make sure that before you get into your interview, you know the research work that you've done very well. That's one of the most key points to excelling in these traditional interviews. Now, naturally, just talking about research is not like the core of these interviews, right? There's a bunch of other things that go down, so let's talk about some of those. They can ask you anything on your resume, so make sure you know everything. You're volunteering, they're gonna ask you about your shadowing opportunities is very, very likely. And then one of the most common interview questions everywhere is, why this school? Now, you've probably answered on your college application why you want to come to the undergrad university. You probably have some good points for that. But honestly, for me, one of the things that slipped my mind when I showed up to one of my undergrad traditional interviews was when they asked me about why this med school. Now, if you are in that situation, like, don't get caught off guard here, okay? Now you know. Make sure that when you come to any interview for any BSMD program, you know why you want to come to the undergrad school in case the med school asks you, and you want to know why you go to the med school in case the undergrad school asks you that. And then when you, of course, are in those respective interviews, you're going to have those points. Now, you're going to go through maybe a couple interviews. It's hard to memorize everything, and you want to have some good points. So what advice do I have here? Well, you're in a virtual interview. I want you to just continuously remember that. You want to be able to capitalize on the advantages that you do have. So before I'd show up to any of my med school interviews, or even the undergrad interviews, I would write out a Google document, a one-page cheat sheet with all the information that I needed for that interview. So what I do is I take evidence like that I've written in previous essays, like things that I brought up that I really liked about the school. I do my research about the med school and have about 3 points for the undergrad school, 3 points for the med school. These 3 key things that I really enjoyed about the school and that are kind of unique points, and I'd write them down on that piece of paper. I'd also write down 1 to 2 questions that I could ask the interviewers. Now, the reason that you have 2 questions and not just 1 is because at some point in your interview, that 1 question might get answered. And if that happens and you don't have any question, then it might be hard in the moment to come up with something new. So you have all your points written down on that paper, you have those 2 questions, you print out that sheet of paper, and you just keep it next to you on the table. Now, hopefully you've reviewed this sheet to where you can go off most of the points on your head, but if at some point in your interview you just glance down for a quick second, right, as they're asking the question or something, you just refresh it in your mind and you answer the question, like, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? That's just fully in your advantage, so go ahead and try that out. I want all of you to remember when you go into these interviews, especially the traditional interviews, that They already know that you're smart. You had to be smart just to get to the interview stage itself. They are impressed by your resume. So from this stage onwards, you want to try to show something that's different. The reason they're interviewing you is because one, they want to make sure that you're a normal human being, right? You just have reasonable communication skills and you don't have some wacky personality that would make for a bad doctor. So just be like a decent, nice human being. Come through with a good, positive energy. And then remember, secondly, that if they like you, there is a very, very good chance that they will offer you a seat in the school. The goal with these interviews is not to just brag to the interview and convince them that you're brilliant because they already know that you're smart. You want to get them to like you. By the end of that hour, you can almost have the interview basically telling you, like the interviewer's telling you that they will give you a spot in the school. That's kind of how it worked out for me. When I went to my Drew University interview, by the time the interview was basically done, like when I was on minute 45 out of the hour, my interviewer was basically talking to me like I already had a seat in the school and like what would happen once I got like accepted. And that's kind of the state that you want to be in. I know you don't want to put the pressure on yourself to have a bar like that, but as long as you do a good job, it's not completely out there for that situation to happen. It happened to me. When your interviewer is talking to you, they are going to be telling you about the school, they're going to be telling you about different things. Listen with a genuine interest. I know you're going to be nervous in the moment, but try to actually like care about what they have to say. Ask them follow-up questions. Really be a listener here. I know the interview is about you, but when I showed up to my Hofstra University interview and I had a 30-minute segment with the med school interviewer, like someone from the med school, I really only talked like about myself for like 10 minutes in that interview. They asked me a couple questions and then the remaining 20 minutes was just them talking about themselves, the school, me asking them questions and being interested in it. And I was really like social engineering them at this point. Like I was working them. I was like truly bringing out like my excitement for the school, really telling the interviewer I was interested in them. And I wasn't doing it in like a douchebag way. I actually do care about what these people had to say. It's just that I made sure that they knew that I cared, right? I was really expressing my excitement for the school and the program, and it ended up working out for me. At first, I was nervous. Oh, I only talked for like 10 minutes. Like, is that gonna harm me? No, it didn't. I got the spot in the med school even after that. And it just goes to show that the interviewers might make a judgment call for you in the first couple minutes, and all you have to do is just maintain that reputation as a good person, and if they like you, then boom, you're in. When I make these YouTube videos, I try to give you all the advice that you wouldn't hear elsewhere, that you wouldn't already know, but just to cover all my bases, I want to finish off this traditional interview section by talking about the most basic parts of the interview, right? You need to know the answer to all the fundamental interview questions that are out there. That's how you're going to practice for this interview. And if naturally you do have to practice a ton for this type of interview, just like you would for the MMIs. So make sure that if they kick off the interview asking you something like, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your hobbies or interests in high school. Talk to me about your research. What have you done? What got you into this field of medicine? Why did you choose medicine? You need to have good staple answers to these. Make sure that you get it down to like even the amount of time that you're spending answering this. 30 to 45 seconds for like the little tell me about yourself. Keep it nice and engaging. For the talking about like medicine, make sure you keep it natural, right? It shouldn't sound like you memorized the answer and you rehearsed it. But the truth is, you both memorized it and you rehearsed it. You just memorized an answer that sounds like it's authentic. So when people ask me, like I'll give you my example, but you can just take my sauce a little bit and rework it into yours. If people ask me like, why do you want to be a doctor? Even now, I low-key do this exact same thing. I say, well, it wasn't like one particular instance that made me decide that medicine was the career for me. Really, it was a combination of the different experiences that I've had in high school. The first thing that got me into medicine was my research. I've done a lot of epilepsy research in high school, and I was super intrigued by the brain and neuroscience, and that was really my gateway into it. As I decided that medicine could be a very exciting field for me, I might want to take my talents into science a little bit deeper, I began shadowing doctors, and then I might touch on my research internships in different fields. I might touch on the volunteering I did and how that compassion for medicine was something that really stood out to me. These are all good things that you want to know. Here's another great traditional interview tip/question. When you're answering that why doctor question, make sure that you have a reason for why you want to be a doctor and not just why you want to go into the healthcare field. If you are answering this question is so important that I might even make a unique video on it. But if you answer this question saying something like, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people. If you come up to me on some, I want to help people, man, like this, think about it for a second, brother. Think about it. Like, I'm astonished when people say, I want to help people as their answer. The garbage collector helps people. Bro, your cleaning lady helps people. You don't want to just go into medicine because you want to help people. Why not become a garbage collector, huh? If you want to help people, why not do any of the million professions out there that are not a doctor that help people? You want to be a doctor for other reasons than just that. And on top of that, if you love science, if that's your answer, because I want to be a doctor because I love science, well then why not become a researcher? Why not do medical research? Why do you specifically want to be a doctor? Now, schools, they do care a lot about your answer to this question, because the thing is, they need to make sure that you're truly committed to medicine. If you have a really weak answer about why you want to be a doctor, well then in their eyes it shows them that you just haven't spent enough time thinking about this. So make sure that when you give your answer, you're able to first state your interest in specifically science, right? That cuts out the garbage collector option. And it really proves that you won't like the medical research side, something that you're going to be doing a lot of, right? You know things, science and technical, and you like it. The second part is going to bring out that compassion in medicine and how you want to fuse the two and how that's going to, being a doctor, solve all of your desires in the future, right? It's exactly what you want to be doing, and it's why that something like a nurse doesn't necessarily align with your career goals. Have some kind of unique story to you based on your experiences that truly makes it feel unique and personalized to your interviewer or an admissions reader. The final interview style that you might run into is some form of a hybrid interview. Now, this is more of like a miscellaneous category in this video because there's so many different ways a hybrid could show up, but I'll just give you one particular example. For Hofstra University and Zucker School of Medicine's interview, I had a kind of broken up interview. This was honestly one of the most scuffed interviews I've been to. I don't know how much they really thought through it, but effectively it was 1 hour total of interviewing where I had two different interviewers. I had one student who was like an undergraduate student who conducted the first half, which was 30 minutes of interviewing, followed by another person who was a representative from the med school who did the second half of the interview, and that was more of a med school style interview. Now, in these two separate interviews, I believe what Hofstra was trying to go for was that the first half of the interview is going to be talking a little bit more about the undergrad university, and then they're going to bring up some ethical dilemma style questions, and that way they're able to get a good mix off of like your personality, your ability to think critically, and they were just going to ask you those like ethical dilemma type questions, whereas the second part of the interview really gauges more of like the medical side of things. They're going to ask you more of like your why doctor type questions, ask you about the med school, your interest in medicine, and they have more of like a professional guiding this, because the undergrad interview was with like an undergrad student and the med school interview was with like an actual college professor, and so there was truly like a level of difference in like the way that the interviews were handled. Now, here's the deal. The Hofstra interview, I'm not gonna lie, out of all these interviews that I talked about, Hofstra interview was straight free. Like, I can't tell you the interview questions that they asked me, but I can tell you this: the ethical dilemma questions they asked had no structure or framework to them at all. Like, they didn't even ask me like an actual ethical dilemma. They just asked me to like effectively just think about how I would answer an ethical dilemma question, if that makes sense. So don't be like, if you have a Hofstra interview, obviously practice, but don't be super nervous for an interview format that might seem a bit odd to you. Usually it's not that hard, as long as you do your general practice, right? You've practiced for your MMI style, you've practiced for your traditional style. If you walk into this hybrid interview and you know those two fundamentals, you'll be ready for anything that they throw at you, because you've done the hours and you know that you're capable of any type of question they can ask. All they're going to ask in these hybrid interviews are lower level questions that what you'd get with more direct interviews of the other two categories. If you've stuck with me this far into the video, y'all know that I'm about to put you on in this bonus section, okay? This is for my absolute academic weapon subscribers. I got you all. First things first, to all of your interviews here, like all the med school interviews, you have to show up full suit. You have to show up. First of all, you're gonna stick out like a sore thumb if you're not in full suit, because all of the other candidates who show up are going to be in full suit. So if you didn't already know that, make sure you come in full suit. For your undergrad interviews, you don't have to go all the way, I think personally for me, when I did my Drew University interview, I just wore like a formal like blue shirt with a tie. I might not have even worn the tie for one of them. It might have just been a straight blue shirt. You don't have to wear a suit for those because they're slightly less formal. But when you're in a med school environment, it is extremely formal, so wear that suit. This might work better for traditional interviews, but in general, if you know who your interviewer is beforehand, go ahead and do some research. When I did my interviews for, this was like Denison University, so it was like one of my pre-med like undergrad schools, but then also for my Drew University med school interview, I had like the name of the person who was reaching out to me, and I knew like who my interview was being conducted with because I shared me like a Zoom link and stuff. And so based off of that information, I did some Google digging and I found like the LinkedIn profiles of these people online. I did research about them. I found out that for my Drew University interview, my guy was like a paramedic. He had a very different medical school journey. So he was like a paramedic for 9 years and then he went to med school. I kept all of that in my mind, and best believe when he started mentioning like different things about his life story and stuff, I knew exactly what questions to ask him that would make him excited, that would make him talk more about himself, and that would make me as like an interviewee feel like a better candidate. Like I'm asking him the questions that he's excited about, so he's enjoying this interaction more. You can do that too, right? You can figure out these names and you can go ahead and like almost exploit that and take that to your advantage. Anything that gives you an edge over your other candidates is something that you should be doing. Next on my list, if you mess up one question in your interview, please do not get bogged down. I'm going to tell you a quick story here that I think will have a lot of meaning. I currently go to RPI's BSMD program, right? When I went to my RPI interview, my first MMI station was with the main like director of the admissions of the BSMD program here. She was the one who was asking me the question. And I absolutely fumbled it. Now, I didn't think I did that bad. I read the prompt. I began answering the question. I'm 4 minutes deep into my answer, and my interviewer cuts me off. She just stops me, like right there, and she's like, effectively tells me, yo, you're answering this question wrong. Like, you're not answering the prompt correctly. The prompt was already whack, okay? It was like this major paragraph about some complete bullshit. I had no clue well, I knew what they were asking. I thought I did. But I guess I didn't, right? Because she cut me off and she's like, you're answering it wrong. And then she starts going on like this rant. For like the next 2 to 3 minutes, she's explaining to me how I'm supposed to be answering these MMI questions. Now, like at this stage, I thought I had done some great MMI practice. But this is my first station of my first ever interview. So I have no clue what's going on. This lady is ranting to me. I find out she's like the dean of the admissions, and I'm shitting my pants, right? Like I'm so scared of what I just did. Did I just like sell the bag to my future here? Now, that experience rattled me a little bit. And now after she went on that rant, she could tell like a little bit that I was like slightly shaken up, because after she gave that answer, she was like, "Oh, continue." And I'm like, I'm trying to hold myself down the best I can, right? I'm not too shaken up. I keep going. But then after I give my answers to her follow-up questions, she then apologizes at the end for her little explosion or whatever. But then after that, right? After that, I got a 5-minute break after that station. I took a breather. I calmed myself down. I just completely forgot about that interview, and I went into my next station, and I absolutely killed it. I killed that one, and then the next one, and then the next one, and I all of my next 5 stations out of the 6 were super, super good. And so at the end of the day, I got into the school. So what I want you guys to take away from that is that's probably the experience I had was probably the worst possible reaction you could get from your interviewer in any given circumstance. And yet I still got into RPI, and I am now going here today. So it doesn't matter how bad you feel you might have messed up a question, just keep moving. Stay confident in it. Be respectful to your interviewer, right? I didn't try to argue with her when she was lecturing me. I just, I kept my mouth shut. I nodded along. I pretended like I understood what she was saying, and then I moved from there. Right? And it all worked out in the end. So don't feel nervous if you bomb one question. It's okay. It happens to the best of us. Final tip here, smile. Smile as much as you can. Be happy and excited. Don't feel free to sometimes drop like a little joke here or there with your interviewer, right? You don't have to be Mr. Comedian over here, but if you have like a good experience with someone, like it's always going to work. I remember with my Drew University interview, I had like a a joke here or there, and it was like a little like funny. It wasn't anything like scripted or anything. It was just in the moment me having a conversation. But we had a little laugh, and it was all good, right? Like I told one of my interviewers that like one of the things I like to do in like my free time is like freestyle rap, and she really enjoyed that the answer and me talking about that for a second. I didn't drop like a cipher for her or anything crazy, but like it's like the little personality that really stands out to your interviewer. And so make sure you're just not like a forgettable person, and that you're enjoying the interview, and it'll all work out. If you follow all of these tips, you practice, you get your hours in, and then you go ahead and take the interview, you will absolutely nail this. I'm telling you that if you know all of this information and you practice, you can truly get ahead of your competition. Now remember, the people you're competing against are also people who have got past these preliminary stages. They've passed the secondary application. They're on to the final interview. These people are not idiots, okay? They're also going to be practicing. But make sure that if you start early, right? You're already watching this video. You have the right guidance, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to grind the questions, have good pre-prepared answers. There is no way you can go wrong. Walk into that interview with some true confidence, and you absolutely got this. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Pratik. Like, comment, subscribe. You boys out. Good luck with your interviews.